Ethan Ross stood in perfect silence, his boots planted firmly on the cool stone path that led to the tomb of the unknown soldier. The air was still, and every sound, every whisper of wind, every shifting footstep seemed loud in the quietness of Arlington. The tomb gleamed under the soft morning light, and Ethan's reflection could be seen faintly in the marble. To him, this wasn't just a job. It was a promise to the men and women who never came home, but not everyone saw it that way. Among the guards, some were proud of the duty, while others thought of it as just another post. A few even laughed behind Ethan's back. They said he took everything too seriously. "Lighten up, Ross," one of them said one day after the shift. "You act like you're guarding the president." Ethan didn't respond. He simply nodded, cleaned his rifle, and prepared for the next watch. He wasn't there for praise. He was there for something much deeper, a quiet connection to the father he never knew. His father had been a pilot who went missing during a mission when Ethan was a child. The military never recovered him, and his name was among those remembered at the tomb. So every step Ethan took on that marble walkway felt like walking beside his father's memory. It wasn't easy. The schedule was tough, and the expectations were even tougher. The guards were required to maintain perfect posture, perfect timing, and perfect respect, no matter the weather. Ethan had marched through pouring rain and freezing cold, never once breaking his stance. To him, the pain in his legs and the sweat on his face were reminders of the honor of this place. Still, some of the older guards didn't see that. They teased him quietly in the barracks, calling him the statue, because he hardly spoke and never relaxed. One of them, a tall guard named Cooper, laughed as he tossed his cap on the bunk. "You're wasting your time trying to be a hero, Ross. Nobody cares who stands out there." Ethan simply smiled faintly and said, "Maybe not, but they cared enough to die for it." The room fell silent for a moment, and even Cooper had no words to reply. Ethan went back to polishing his shoes until they reflected the light like glass. After the shift, when most guards went to rest or joke around, Ethan did something unusual. He sat at his small desk, opened a thick manual about aircraft systems, and began to study. He was taking correspondence courses, trying to learn everything he could about aviation. It was a quiet dream that burned inside him, to become a pilot one day like his father. The others found out soon enough. "Ross wants to fly a B-2? Cooper said one evening with a grin. "That's rich. You can't even loosen up during a drill." The laughter echoed in the room, but Ethan didn't argue. He simply closed his book and replied, "Every big thing starts small." Over the months, his quiet determination started to draw attention, not from those who mocked him, but from the officers who noticed his discipline. His movements were precise, his uniform always perfect, and his respect for duty unmatched. During one inspection, a senior officer paused in front of him and said softly, "Ross, your father would be proud." Ethan's throat tightened, but he managed a firm salute. That night, he wrote a letter to his mother, telling her how things were going. He didn't mention the teasing. Instead, he wrote about the honor he felt, the pride of serving, and how each day he tried to make his father's memory proud. His mother's reply came a week later, written in neat, loving handwriting. "Your father always believed that true respect doesn't need words. It's shown through actions. Keep walking your path, son." Those words stayed in his heart. Every shift, Ethan stood taller, his eyes fixed ahead, his thoughts calm and focused. He began to understand that the silence around the tomb wasn't empty. It was filled with voices of courage, sacrifice, and love for something greater than oneself. And though people around him didn't always understand, Ethan didn't need them to. He wasn't doing it for them. One rainy afternoon, as tourists watched from behind the ropes, a young boy pointed at Ethan and whispered to his father, "He doesn't even blink." The father smiled and said quietly, "He's a tomb guard. That's what respect looks like." Ethan heard it, and a small warmth filled his chest. For the first time, someone truly saw what this duty meant. When the ceremony ended, Ethan returned to the barracks, drenched but proud. As he hung his uniform to dry, Cooper looked at him again, shaking his head. "You really think this will take you somewhere?" he asked. Ethan looked out the window at the dark clouds breaking apart. "Maybe it already has," he replied. He didn't know it then, but those long, silent walks and endless hours of discipline were shaping him for something far greater. The patience, the focus, the calm under pressure, all of it was preparing him for the sky. And one day the same people who mocked him for standing guard would look up and see him soaring above them. But for now, Ethan just continued his silent march, one step at a time in perfect rhythm, beneath the flag that waved gently over the tomb of the unknown soldier. Years passed, and the world outside Arlington slowly changed. But Ethan Ross never forgot the marble path he once walked, or the promise he made to himself beneath the soft echo of his footsteps. His service as a tomb guard ended with honor. But it left him with something far greater than medals. It gave him patience, respect, and the quiet strength to face any challenge. Now, as a civilian again, he faced a new kind of challenge. He wanted to fly. Not just any plane, but the most advanced aircraft in the world, the B-2 Spirit stealth bomber. It was a dream that seemed far away, almost impossible. People told him the same thing again and again. Ethan, you're not from a pilot family, or you don't have the background or the money. But Ethan had heard those words before. They didn't stop him then, and they wouldn't stop him now. He applied to the Air Force flight program. It took months of waiting, interviews, and tests. When the acceptance letter finally arrived, Ethan sat quietly holding it in his hands for a long time. He remembered his father's photo on the shelf, the folded flag, and his mother's letters. "I'm going to do it, Dad," he whispered. "I'll finish what you started." Training began early and ended late. The days were long and tiring, filled with math, flight theory, and endless drills. Ethan wasn't the top of the class. In fact, some of the others thought he was too serious, just like before. They laughed when he stayed up late reading manuals or practicing controls in the simulator. "You're wasting your time, Ross," one cadet said with a smirk. "You'll never make it to stealth bomber school. That's for the best of the best." Ethan didn't reply. He simply smiled and said, "Then I'll just have to become the best." Little by little, he started to stand out, not because he was the smartest, but because he was the calmest. When others panicked, Ethan stayed focused. When others rushed through their work, he took his time to get it right. His instructors noticed. One of them, Captain Miller, called him aside one afternoon after a flight simulation. "Ross," the weird captain said, "your control is steady, but what makes you different is your patience. You don't fight the plane, you work with it. That's rare." Ethan nodded respectfully. "Sir, I learned that from the ground before I ever came here." The captain smiled, not understanding the full story, but sensing there was depth behind the words. Weeks turned into months. The training became harder. The aircraft grew faster. The mistakes cost more. But Ethan stayed calm through it all. He studied when others slept. He practiced until his movements felt natural. And whenever he doubted himself, he remembered the silence at Arlington, the discipline that had shaped him. Then came the day that tested everything he had learned. It was supposed to be a normal training flight. The sky was clear, the sun shining bright, and Ethan's team was running through standard maneuvers. But halfway through, something went wrong. A sudden system error flashed across his panel and one engine began to fail. The aircraft shook violently. His co-pilot's voice trembled. "Ross, what do we do?" For a moment, everything around him seemed to slow. Ethan's hands gripped the controls, and his breathing steadied. He didn't panic. He didn't shout. He just remembered the steps, one at a time, calm and precise, just like walking the line at the tomb. "Check the fuel valve, switch to auxiliary system, stabilize pitch," he said firmly. The aircraft wobbled, but slowly, it began to level out. Within minutes, they were back in control. They landed safely, the wheels touching the runway with a smooth thud. The other cadets cheered, but Ethan just sat quietly for a moment, his hands still on the controls. He knew that calmness, not skill alone, had saved them. When he stepped out of the cockpit, Captain Miller was waiting. "That was textbook perfect," the captain said. "Most pilots would have lost it up there. You didn't." Ethan replied softly, "Sir, when you've stood in silence before heroes, you learn not to be afraid of stillness." The words caught the captain off guard. He didn't ask what Ethan meant, but that day he made a special note in Ethan's file. Recommended for advanced stealth training. Months later, the letter arrived. Ethan had been accepted into the B-2 program. It was one of the most secretive and selective programs in the entire Air Force. Out of hundreds of pilots, only a handful were chosen. Ethan read the letter twice, barely believing it. Then he called his mother. She cried with pride over the phone, her voice trembling. "Your father would have smiled so wide today," she said. The next phase of training was harder than anything before. The B-2 was unlike any other plane. It moved like a shadow, silent and powerful. It required precision beyond imagination. But for Ethan, precision had been his life. Every measured step at the tomb, every silent hour in the rain had prepared him for this moment. He faced nights of exhaustion, mornings of self-doubt, and days when every muscle in his body wanted to quit. But he didn't. He remembered the faces of those buried under the white stones, and he thought of the promise he had made as a young guard, to honor the fallen by becoming someone worthy of their sacrifice. And so, while others practiced for perfection, Ethan lived it. When the final exams came, Ethan performed with calm focus. His instructors watched in silence as he guided the B-2 simulator through storms, low visibility, and critical system failures, all handled with the same steady control that defined him. When it was over, one instructor whispered, "That's not a pilot, that's a soldier in the sky." Ethan passed with one of the highest scores in the class, but for him, it wasn't about ranking or titles. It was about keeping a promise. To himself, to his family, and to every nameless hero whose memory rested in stone. He didn't yet know that the world would soon learn his name. The same people who once mocked him would one day stand in awe. But for now he simply looked out at the horizon where the sky met the earth and whispered, "This is only the beginning." The morning sky over Washington was calm and clear, painted in soft shades of blue and gold. A gentle breeze moved through the crowd that had gathered near the airfield for the annual Air Force Air Show. Families stood with their children. Soldiers stood tall in uniform, and veterans sat quietly with proud smiles. Everyone was waiting for one thing: the arrival of the B-2 Spirit stealth bomber, the most advanced aircraft in the world. Among the crowd stood a few familiar faces from long ago, former guards from the tomb of the unknown soldier. They had come together out of curiosity and nostalgia. It had been years since they last wore the uniform, and even longer since they had seen Ethan Ross. They remembered him as the quiet one, the one they used to tease for being too serious. One of them, Cooper, chuckled as he adjusted his cap. "Remember Ross?" he said to his friend. "The guy who said he'd be a pilot someday?" His friend laughed softly. "Yeah, I remember. Wonder what happened to him." As they spoke, a deep silence spread through the airfield. The crowd looked up as the voice of the announcer came through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, prepare to welcome the United States Air Force B-2 Spirit, piloted today by Captain Ethan Ross." For a moment, no one moved. Cooper blinked in disbelief. "Did he just say Ethan Ross?" he asked quietly. The others looked at each other, stunned. Before anyone could speak, a dark shape appeared in the distance, sleek, wide, and silent. It was the B-2, gliding gracefully across the sky like a shadow in the sunlight. The massive aircraft moved without sound, its wings cutting through the air with quiet power. The crowd gasped as it passed overhead, its black surface reflecting the light for just a moment. It seemed to float rather than fly, a symbol of strength and precision. Inside the cockpit, Ethan sat with calm focus, his hands steady on the controls. His eyes scanned the instruments, his movement smooth and exact. He could hear the faint hum of the engines and the voice of the co-pilot beside him, but his mind was peaceful. Every flight reminded him of his journey, the long nights of study, the days of silence at the tomb, the lessons learned through patience and respect. "Ready for landing approach?" "Captain," said the co-pilot. Ethan nodded. "Steady descent. Let's make it perfect." As the aircraft approached the runway, the announcer's voice rose again, excitement clear in his tone. "The pilot you see today once served as a tomb guard at Arlington National Cemetery, a man whose dedication and discipline brought him from silent watch to the skies above us. Let's welcome Captain Ethan Ross." The wheels touched down smoothly. the aircraft slowing with graceful precision. The crowd erupted in cheers. Cameras flashed. Children waved flags. Veterans stood and saluted. The huge black plane came to a stop and the cockpit opened slowly. Ethan stepped out wearing his flight suit and cap, the sunlight reflecting off the pilot's badge on his chest. He looked out at the sea of faces and for a brief moment his eyes caught a few familiar ones, Cooper and the other guards from years ago. They stood frozen, their expressions filled with awe and quiet shame. The man they once mocked had achieved what few ever could, but Ethan didn't look at them with pride or anger. Instead, he smiled kindly and gave a respectful nod. He wasn't here to prove them wrong. He was here to honor the path that led him here. After the ceremony, as he walked among the crowd, a young cadet approached him nervously. "Sir, I've read about the tomb guards. Is it true you served there before becoming a pilot?" Ethan smiled. "Yes, that's true." The cadet looked amazed. "How did you do it, sir? How did you go from that to this?" Ethan paused for a moment, his eyes drifting toward the distant horizon. "By doing every small thing with respect," he said softly. "Whether you're standing in silence or flying in the sky, it's the same. You give your best no matter who's watching." The cadet nodded, his eyes shining with inspiration. Nearby, Cooper slowly walked up to Ethan. He hesitated before speaking, his voice quiet and unsure. Captain Ross, I just wanted to say I was wrong about you back then." Ethan looked at him and smiled warmly. "You weren't wrong, Cooper. I was still learning who I was." "We all were." Cooper lowered his eyes. "Still, I shouldn't have mocked you. I didn't see what you saw." Ethan placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's all right. Sometimes people laugh because they don't understand what someone's fighting for. I never held it against you." The two men stood there in silence for a moment, the sound of jet engines in the background. It wasn't the silence of the tomb, but it carried the same weight, the silence of understanding, respect, and forgiveness. Later that day, as the sun began to set, Ethan walked alone near the edge of the runway. The crowd had gone and only the soft hum of the wind remained. He looked up at the sky where the B-2 had disappeared minutes earlier and smiled. He thought of his father, the pilot who never came home, and the promise he had made long ago as a young guard in silence. He whispered softly, "I did it, Dad." At that moment, a small group of birds flew overhead, their wings glinting in the last light of the evening. Ethan watched them fade into the golden sky, feeling at peace. His journey had come full circle, from the stillness of the tomb to the boundless sky, from being mocked to being honored. As he walked back to the base, a reporter caught up to him for an interview. "Captain Ross," she said, "people are calling you an example of perseverance. What do you want young soldiers and pilots to learn from your story?" Ethan thought for a moment before answering. "I want them to know that respect is the foundation of greatness. Whether you're guarding a tomb or flying a bomber, do it with pride and heart. The world may not see your effort at first, but one day they'll see your results." The reporter smiled and thanked him. Ethan gave one last look at the sky, then turned to walk away, his footsteps steady and sure, just like the ones he once took along the marble walkway of Arlington. In that moment, it was clear that Ethan Ross had not only become one of the finest pilots in the Air Force, but also a living example of what true honor and determination could achieve. The silence he once guarded had taught him how to speak through his actions. And now, every time the B-2 Spirit soared across the sky, it carried not just technology and power, but also the quiet spirit of a man who never gave up, never wavered, and never forgot where his journey began.